What if the smallest voice in a crowded world could heal the biggest emptiness a man had ever known? The park was almost empty that Sunday morning, the sky heavy with clouds and the air thick with quiet. Daniel Frost sat alone on a bench watching the leaves move like time. He wore a suit even on weekends, though. No one was around to notice he had everything: money, mansions, a company that never slept yet. He hadn't smiled in months since his wife left. The house had become too big. Too silent. Success meant nothing when there was no one to share it with. A soft voice broke his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir." He turned, startled. A little girl no older than 7 stood in front of him, holding a folded $5 bill in one hand and a small piece of paper in the other. Her dress was simple, her shoes worn, but her eyes bright with determination. She looked up at him and said shyly, "I don't mean to bother you, but would you be my dad for one day?" Daniel blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." What? She held out the $5 bill, her tiny hand trembling. "I have $50 saved from chores. I can pay you. I just need a dad for one day. My school's having a Father's Day picnic and everyone has someone but me." He stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Where's your mom?" She smiled softly. "Working double shifts." She said she can't come, and it's okay. I just thought maybe if I could borrow a dad, no one would laugh at me this time." For a long moment, Daniel couldn't speak. He looked at the small, wrinkled bills in her hand, then at her hopeful eyes. Something in him cracked like a window, letting in air for the first time. He said gently, "You don't need to pay me, sweetheart." She frowned. "But it's your time. I can't take that for free." He smiled faintly. "You already paid for it the moment you asked." He stood and said softly, "What's your name?" She grinned. "Emily." "And what should I call you?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Call me Daniel." The next morning, the sun rose over the small school field where laughter filled the air and the smell of pancakes drifted through the breeze. Daniel stood there awkwardly, surrounded by fathers tossing footballs and laughing with their kids. He felt like a stranger in a world he'd forgotten how to belong to. Then Emily came running toward him, her pigtails bouncing, her eyes sparkling brighter than the morning itself. "You came," she shouted, throwing her arms around his waist. For a moment Daniel froze. No one had hugged him in years, but then something inside him softened. He knelt down and smiled. "Of course I came. You hired me, remember?" She laughed, gripping his hand tightly. "Then let's get to work, Daddy." The word hit him like lightning, not painful but awakening. She dragged him from one booth to another, showing him the games, the crafts, the endless excitement. At every turn she introduced him proudly. "This is my dad," she'd say, beaming. No one knew she was pretending, but Daniel started realizing that for her this wasn't pretend, and somehow it didn't feel fake to him either. At one point she noticed him looking lost among the laughing parents and whispered, "It's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here." He blinked, trying to hide the sting in his eyes. "I think I can do that," he said softly. They spent hours together, building paper airplanes, racing in the 3-legged contest, eating messy ice cream cones that dripped onto his expensive shoes. He laughed for the first time in years, really laughed, the kind that made people turn and smile because joy is contagious. When the picnic ended, Emily looked up at him, holding his hand. "You were the best dad today," she said with pure innocence. "You made me feel like I wasn't missing anything." He knelt down again, his voice trembling. "You made me feel like I finally had something to give again." Her mother's car pulled up near the field. A tired woman stepped out, confusion on her face when she saw the man beside her daughter. "Emily," she called. "Who's this?" Emily grinned. "Mom, this is Daniel. He helped me today." Her mother gave him a wary look. "Thank you, sir. You didn't have to do that." Daniel smiled quietly. "Maybe I needed it as much as she did." Emily's mother, Claire, stood beside her car, the afternoon sun painting golden streaks through her hair. She looked at Daniel, trying to read the face of the man who had just spent the day pretending to be her daughter's father. There was something different about him. Not arrogance, not pity, just quiet warmth, the kind that comes from someone who's been empty too long and finally found something that filled the silence. Claire thanked him again, but Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. She gave me more than I gave her." Claire smiled faintly. "That sounds like something a real father would say." He chuckled softly, watching Emily climb into the car. "Maybe I just remembered what that feels like." Before the door closed, Emily looked up at him. "Can I see you again?" she asked. He hesitated, unsure if it was right, but Claire noticed the way his expression softened, the way her daughter looked at him as if she already knew the answer. Claire spoke gently. "We're usually at the park on Sundays if you ever feel like walking by." He smiled at her, gratitude flickering behind his eyes. "Maybe I will." The following Sunday he did. Then again the week after. What began as chance visits turned into a quiet tradition. They'd feed ducks, draw chalk castles on the pavement, share ice cream, and talk about everything Emily's young mind could imagine. Claire started joining them, sitting beside Daniel on the bench, the awkwardness melting a little more each time. As weeks turned into months, the three of them began to fill each other's missing spaces. Emily's laughter, Claire's gentle steadiness, and Daniel's newfound warmth blending into something that felt almost like home. One evening, as the park lights flickered on, Claire looked at him and said softly, "You know, you don't have to keep showing up just for her." He turned to her, smiling. "I know. I think I'm showing up for me now." Emily ran to them holding 2 paper crowns she'd made from napkins. "One for Mommy, one for Daddy," she said proudly, placing them on their heads. Daniel's chest tightened, but this time it didn't hurt. It felt right. Claire looked at him, their crowns crooked and silly, but her smile steady. "Seems like you got your job back," she whispered. He laughed quietly. "This time I'm never quitting." And as the three of them sat beneath the fading sunset, laughter echoing softly across the park, Daniel finally understood that family isn't something you buy or earn. It's something you're chosen into by love that asks for nothing in return. The years passed quietly but beautifully. What began as a single day of pretend had turned into a life full of real moments. Dinners filled with laughter, birthdays with messy frosting, and quiet evenings where the house no longer echoed with silence. Daniel's mansion, once cold and echoing with loneliness, was now alive with warmth. The marble floors were still polished, but now scattered with toys and crayon drawings proudly taped to the walls. He often found himself standing at the doorway of Emily's room, watching her sleep with her paper crowns still stacked on her bedside table. She'd never stopped calling him Dad, not once. At first he thought the word might break him, but now it healed something that had been empty for far too long. Claire had become more than just Emily's mother to him. She was his peace, the person who taught him that love didn't need grand gestures or contracts, only consistency. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, the night sky stretched wide above them. Claire smiled softly and said, "You know, you never did take that $50. He laughed quietly, his voice warm. "I think it was the best investment I ever made." She leaned against him, their hands brushing together in the dark. "You changed her world," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, she changed mine." When Emily turned 10, the school held another Father's Day picnic. This time, Daniel didn't sit on the edge pretending to belong. He was the first to show up, wearing a goofy one dad shirt Emily had made for him. Claire stood watching from the crowd, tears in her eyes, as her daughter, and the man she'd once paid $50 to love her for a day, laughed like they'd been family forever. Later that evening, as they drove home, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, clutching Daniel's hand from behind the seat. Claire looked over at him and said softly, "You really did become her dad." He glanced at the little girl in the mirror, smiling. "No," he whispered, his voice full of love. "She made me one." And from that day on, Daniel never once felt lonely again, because the smallest act of kindness, born from a child's wish, had given him the greatest family he never knew he needed. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings,